Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Sorry, I thought of a note that I have to make really quick before I begin. You know, throughout my whole life, no matter how early in the morning I ever got up, my dad was up an hour before me. And he also was never late for things. He was always early. And today is one of the times I wish he was a little bit later for something. That's okay. Benjamin Andrew McGowan, born in Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, July 25th, 1954. To United States Air Force service member Roger Lee McGowan and his wife Ruth Joanne McGowan. He was the second of 3 siblings, and when he was just a little guy, when his daddy was holding him, trying to get him to go to sleep at night, he was up so late and he was cooing, and his dad said that he cooed like a hoot owl. And that was the beginning of the nickname Hoot that followed him among his close family members and the folks that knew him from Nebraska up to the day that he went on home to be with Jesus. When he was a year old, the family moved from Nebraska to the South Bank near Francois Lake. Apparently, Roger had been reading stories about guys that went up to the far north, and he wanted to try it, which makes sense. I think that a love for stories about untamed frontiers is probably why I saw my dad asleep on the couch so many times with a Louis L'Amour novel on his chest. And also why he fell asleep when he got older, watching so many black and white westerns. Anyway, while they were living there, there was a fire in the house from a kerosene lamp, and I guess they had to live in the shed for a little while. They moved back to Nebraska when he was 3. And he did his chores, feeding chickens, and pigs, and milking cows. I got a few talks about milking cows. And he even showed me when I was a little guy, but I never got to do it. There was also he also had a horse named Snip. He also, when he was a little guy doing his chores on the farm in Nebraska, he befriended a badger. And his dad, Roger, found out about that when he took him out to show him the badger. And her little babies and was holding, and he said, "Oh, don't do that." And he said, "It's okay." And that was kind of my dad's way with animals. He also, if you were close enough to my dad, then he would have told you a story from when he was a kid in Nebraska. When he went out into the fields and he prayed to be able to control the wind. And he said that God let him do it. And he said he'd tell the wind, blow that way, and it'd blow that way, and it'd blow, and it'd blow over that hill. And he said a voice behind him said, "Son, do you know what's over that hill? Do you know the farmers that live over there?" And he said, "No, God. Maybe it's best that you just control the wind, huh?" These are just tears. It's good to cry sometimes. They moved back up to Canada when Dad was 11 in September of '65 to a farm near Vanderhoof. And that's where he'd spent his teenage years. I remember Dad telling me about the arguments that he had with his dad, because my dad wanted to be a service member down in the States too. He really would have liked at that time to have had a military career, but his dad wouldn't let him. He almost ended up doing it though, because he got a draft notice from the United States for the Vietnam War. But in June of 1971, the initial draft order expired a month before he turned 18 years old. And that meant that he didn't have to go down and go into the Vietnam War. Which makes me happy, because I like being here. He graduated and he worked at Plateau Sawmill, which is the first place that he met. That's the first place he met Cherry Lee Giesbrecht. And they were at a party together at my Aunt Carol's place. And my dad saw her walking across the lawn, and he said, that voice said, "There goes your wife." It was 2 years from then before they'd start dating. They were, God must have known that they would make beautiful children.
Amen.
They were married August 20th, 1977. And no one ever looks back decades later at their hairdo from their early 20s and thinks that that was awesome. And so I was hoping to get up here before my dad had passed to visit, and I was waiting to hear what he was going to say about my man bun. And I was going to show him a picture of his afro when he got married. And I thought that would, he would have given me the gears, but I thought I could, get off easy. He was a faithful and loving husband to my mom. And I remember a story that that a young man had said when we lived in Quesnel. He said he'd been to a public event with my mom and my dad, and he said to my dad, "Your wife is never further from you than arm's length." And he said, "That's how I want to be with my wife." I thought that was really touching. It illustrates the type of love and closeness that they had. He really needed to be close to her. They're close again now, huh?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. My dad had become a millwright and then gone into management in that mill, but then he went to managing department stores. He managed a Stedman store in Kelowna. He ended up I believe managing it was a co-op in Fort St. John, and then he went to managing a trucking company there. And that's where, in December 1978, they had their first son, my brother Adam. And in April of 1981, I was born. I remember the days of Dad's blue Dodge pickup and our first collie dog. There was always a collie dog around.
I remember him picking me up and saying, "We got to go to the hospital and get your new brother, and your mother."
Yeah, there was a collie dog around to the end. That's a McGowan thing. Yeah, in 1988, Dad had been managing the trucking company, and I think it's important that I say things like this. He burned out. Life is tough on all of us. And so he needed to get back down to the family ranch in Nebraska. And so that's what we did. And from Nebraska, I remember my dad staying up too late, telling Adam and I the story of Samson in our bunk beds, and explaining it to us. And it's a good thing to be a father who keeps the kids up too late telling a Bible stories once in a while. That and sitting around with old farmers who had hard hands and soft hearts around the kitchen table talking about the scriptures and debating what they meant gave me an enduring love for the scriptures. I will never forget that old red Schofield Notes King James version of my dad's. He worked on the family ranch down there with my Uncle Lee. And he, after a while, also sold insurance to make ends meet. And while he sold insurance, I remember, he doesn't tell stories like this, but I get to brag on him because he's not here. He was one of the top insurance salesmen in the United States for his company. I remember their magazine and looking through it and seeing the top ones in every state and seeing my dad's picture all the time because of his hustle and his love for people. We moved back to Canada, up to Quesnel, British Columbia, when Dad would have been 37.
Good choice.
And he did a few different jobs, but he landed as a foreman at a mill down there. While he was doing that, I remember having a conversation. It would have been about 6th grade, and I was walking home from school, and my dad was the foreman of the shift at that mill that the other kid, his dad was the shop steward for the union. And that kid said, "My dad says of everyone in management in that mill, none of them respects workers' rights except for your dad." You know, that's a big deal. And I lived long enough to hear a little bit of gossip about him, and the gossip about my dad is that he could go further in business, except he's too honest. That's good. That's a good example to follow. Adam and I graduated from while we lived in Quesnel, and my dad's first 2 grandkids, Elijah and Yara McGowan, were born from my first marriage there. Him and my mom moved to Fort St. James in 2005 for him to accept a planer superintendent role at the Polk and Talbot Mill. And he spent the last 18 years of his life in this wonderful community where they fit in so well. He had 2 of his other grandkids here, Justice and Emma McGowan, to my brother Adam. He led a men's group that produced multiple Pentecostal ministers in northern BC. I mean, that's pretty awesome. He finished his career and retired here. He walked and talked with cows. And the people here can't stop telling me what a kind man he was. And that means a heck of a lot to me. Him and Mom lived on their farm until she passed in December of 2021. My dad devoted the last couple of years of her life to end-of-life care for Mom. And he passed on July 2nd of this year. So there's a lot of scattered thoughts that I'm bringing together to give this eulogy. I can't let this one go. My dad's dad died when he was 18 years old. And he always told me, I wish I could have picked up the phone and just called him as an adult and said, hey, Dad, what do you think about this? You know, just had a conversation. Well, he was here for me till 42. How about that? My dad always said there's no one quite like dear old Dad. And you know he's right. There's nobody quite like dear old Dad. And I also can't let this one go without saying it. Whenever I wanted to step out in faith and do something big, he'd say, there's nothing stopping you but fear and common sense. My dad's last words to me on the phone on the Friday before he passed on Sunday were, boy, your daddy sure loves Jesus. That's good. So I had this poem put in the program called Good Timber. And it came to my attention a few days ago, and I think it was a God thing. The tree that never had to fight for sun and sky and air and light, but stood out in the open plain and never got its share of rain, never became a forest king, but lived and died a scrubby thing. The man who never had to toil to gain and farm his patch of soil, who never had to win his share of sun and sky and light and air, never became a manly man, but lived and died as he began. Good timber does not grow with ease. The stronger wind, the stronger trees. The further sky, the greater length. The more the storm, the more the strength. By sun and cold, by rain and snow, in trees and men, good timbers grow. Where thickest lies the forest growth, we find the patriarchs of both, and they hold counsel with the stars, whose broken branches show the scars of many winds and much of strife. This is the common law.